In the shadows of wartime Berlin, power wasn't only traded in smoky offices or on blood-stained battlefields. It was whispered in dim hotel rooms, behind velvet curtains, and between the sheets of the most powerful men in the Reich. These were Hitler's other soldiers, women trained not to fight with bullets but with beauty, charm and deception. They called them Die Frauen der Nacht, the women of the night. But these weren't ordinary prostitutes. They were recruited, trained and controlled by a secret intelligence network that reported directly to the SS. Their mission was simple: to seduce, to listen, and to destroy from within. Every night, generals, diplomats, and even foreign agents confessed their secrets to them, believing they were safe in pleasure's embrace. But in truth, every moan, every whisper, every careless word was another weapon for the Nazi state. The forbidden truth is that Berlin's brothels weren't just dens of lust. They were intelligence outposts, and the women inside were among the most dangerous spies of the war. What none of them knew was that they too were being watched. In 1940, as the Nazi war machine expanded across Europe, Berlin became more than just the capital of the Reich. It became a city of masks. Behind the dazzling parades and propaganda films, there was another Berlin, a darker one. Here, men of power sought escape from the weight of war, and the SS saw an opportunity. Heinrich Himmler, obsessed with control and secrecy, approved the creation of a network of special establishments. Officially, they were entertainment venues for high-ranking officers. Unofficially, they were the beating heart of one of Germany's most secret intelligence operations, Salon Kitty. Located on the quiet, respectable street of Giesebrechtstrasse, Salon Kitty appeared to be just another luxurious brothel. It was run by a well-known madam named Kitty Schmidt, a woman whose charm, refinement, and connections gave her access to Berlin's elite. But what Kitty didn't know at first was that the Gestapo had chosen her establishment as the perfect cover. The SS transformed her rooms into recording chambers, wiring the walls with hidden microphones and surveillance equipment. Every encounter was secretly taped, every word catalogued. Lust had become a weapon, and the women, its silent soldiers. The women chosen for this mission weren't random. They were carefully selected from across occupied Europe. Young, educated, multilingual, and alluring. Some were actresses, others secretaries, a few even from noble families who had fallen on hard times. The SS offered them wealth, protection, and purpose, to serve the Reich in ways men never could. But their training was far from glamorous. They were taught not only the art of seduction, but also interrogation, psychology, and manipulation. Each learned how to coax secrets from the lips of men who thought themselves untouchable. They were instructed to remember everything: troop movements, code names, political rumors, and to never fall in love. Once inside Salon Kitty, every night became a performance. The clients, Nazi officers, foreign diplomats, industrial magnates, entered believing they were kings for an evening. The women greeted them with champagne and a practiced smile, guiding them into candlelit rooms draped in velvet. Hidden beneath the floorboards, SS technicians monitored every word through the microphones, scribbling down confessions, arguments, and careless boasts. The intimacy of these encounters stripped men of their defenses, exposing truths they would never reveal under interrogation. The line between pleasure and betrayal blurred until both became indistinguishable. But beneath the perfume and laughter, fear ruled the house. The women knew they were being watched just as closely as their clients. One mistake, one word of disloyalty, could mean disappearance into a camp. Kitty Schmidt herself was trapped. She had once fled to Italy to escape the Gestapo's grip. But they dragged her back, forcing her to cooperate or face ruin. In that brothel there was no freedom, only layers of deceit. The spies spied on the officers spied on each other, and the SS spied on them all. In Hitler's Germany, even passion was political. Still, the operation thrived. The intelligence gathered from Salon Kitty proved invaluable during the early years of the war. Reports of generals' doubts, officers' affairs, and whispered conspiracies flowed directly to Reinhard Heydrich, the butcher of Prague. He understood what few others did, that information extracted through seduction was often more honest than any official report. But Heydrich's ambitions were boundless. He expanded the network, sending women agents into foreign embassies, military hotels, and even neutral countries like Sweden and Switzerland. The bed had become the battlefield, and victory lay in silence and deceit. As Berlin descended deeper into war, so too did the women of the Salon. The parties grew darker, the conversations more desperate. Men came drunk with fear, confessing their disillusionment with the Führer, their exhaustion from endless campaigns. The women listened, recorded and smiled, knowing that their every nod sealed another man's fate. Some began to break, haunted by the faces of those they betrayed, sickened by the double life they lived. Yet there was no escape. To leave meant death. To stay meant losing their souls, one whispered secret at a time. By 1943, as Allied bombs began to fall on Berlin, the walls of Salon Kitty shook, but the microphones still worked. The empire built on seduction was crumbling, yet its secrets endured. Many of the women vanished when the Red Army approached. Some were captured, others executed, a few disappeared into the ruins. Kitty Schmidt herself survived the war. Silent and forgotten, her brothel turned to rubble. What remained were the tapes, locked away in SS archives, proof of a time when Berlin's most intimate moments were weapons of war. And in the ruins of that secret world, one question lingered: who truly controlled whom, the men who thought they ruled the Reich or the women who ruled their knights? By 1943, the illusion of Nazi invincibility had begun to crumble. Stalingrad had fallen, morale was rotting, and the once proud officers who swaggered into Salon Kitty now came in hollow-eyed and trembling. The laughter that once filled the air was replaced by nervous whispers and the clink of empty glasses. The women who served them had become ghosts of themselves, drained, fragile, yet still forced to play their roles. For every smile they offered, there was a hidden ache, a silent question of how long this masquerade could last before it devoured them all. The city outside burned, and so did the women's faith in survival. The SS grew more desperate, more paranoid. Orders came down to intensify surveillance, to extract every ounce of truth from every drunken conversation. New faces appeared, men in plain suits who never smiled, who watched the watchers. Some of the girls vanished overnight, accused of sympathy for the enemy. Others were reassigned, a word that carried the echo of finality. Kitty Schmidt, once a confident madam, now lived in fear of her own house. Every knock at the door felt like a summons to hell. The power she once wielded had turned into a noose tightening around her neck. The women themselves began to fracture under the weight of dual lives. They could no longer tell where the act ended and their true selves began. They comforted men who bragged about burning villages, men who ordered executions, and then wept when those same men begged for mercy in their arms. One, a Polish girl named Helena, wrote in her hidden diary that she prayed for the Allies to bomb the city, to end this theatre of lies. But even that confession, had it been found, would have condemned her. So she smiled, powdered her face, and returned to the stage of betrayal. By now, Salon Kitty had become a paradox, both indispensable and dangerous to the regime. The intelligence it gathered was valuable, but the very act of recording the Reich's inner circle exposed the rot at its core. Himmler feared the contents of those tapes almost as much as he prized them. He ordered that the recordings be destroyed if the Allies ever reached Berlin. But rumours spread that duplicates had been made, hidden in safe houses, and that certain women knew exactly where they were. The hunters had become liabilities. To protect the secrets of the Reich, those who possessed them would have to vanish. The bombings intensified. Entire districts were reduced to ashes, yet the brothel continued its nightly operations as if denial could keep the empire alive. The women would perform while the walls shook, pretending not to hear the distant wail of air raid sirens. Between moans and murmurs, they listened to their clients talk about lost divisions, failed campaigns, and their secret plans to flee Germany. Some begged the women for escape routes, passports, or promises of loyalty. The irony was suffocating. The seducers were now the confessors, and the supposed masters of the Reich were begging prostitutes for salvation. It was during one of these chaotic nights that the breaking point finally came. A young SS officer, drunk and disillusioned, confessed to one of the girls that the Führer's inner circle was collapsing from paranoia. He revealed details of a secret plan, an attempt by high-ranking officers to assassinate Hitler himself. The woman, torn between duty and conscience, passed the information through the Salon's channels. Within days, several of the conspirators were arrested. The walls of Salon Kitty had claimed more victims, and the woman who betrayed them disappeared soon after. Whether she was rewarded or executed, no one ever found out. By 1944, Salon Kitty was a dying creature gasping for air. The luxury, the power, the pretense, all of it faded beneath the rubble of Berlin's ruins. The SS quietly dismantled the operation, removing the recording devices, destroying the archives and erasing every trace of the program. Kitty Schmidt was placed under surveillance, her remaining girls dispersed to other assignments. Yet the scars of what had happened there would never fade. The women had become living ghosts, witnesses to the intimate decay of a monstrous regime. In the final months of the war, as the Red Army closed in, the last surviving women of the Salon huddled in basements, listening to the thunder of artillery. Some still wore the silk dresses they once used to lure generals, now torn and stained with ash. They had served a machine that devoured them, believing at times they were the hunters, not the prey. But as Berlin fell, they understood the truth. They'd been weapons crafted for a war that had already lost its soul, and in that revelation something within them finally shattered. When the Red Army stormed into Berlin in April 1945, the city's mask of power was ripped away. The streets that once echoed with marching boots now bled with chaos and surrender. Inside what was left of Salon Kitty, the chandeliers hung shattered, the velvet drapes torn and blackened by smoke. The women who had once whispered state secrets now whispered prayers. The SS had fled or died, leaving behind their ghosts, files half-burned, microphones ripped from walls, and the scent of fear lingering like perfume. For the first time in years, the women were no longer being watched, but freedom, when it came, felt hollow and cruel. The Soviets were not liberators in the eyes of these women. They were conquerors. Many of the survivors of Salon Kitty were captured, interrogated, and branded as Nazi collaborators. To the victors, they were symbols of decadence and betrayal, not victims of coercion. Some were assaulted, others executed without trial. In a single cruel twist, the very tools of seduction and espionage that had kept them alive under the Nazis became the marks of their damnation. Kitty Schmidt herself was found hiding in the ruins, clutching a suitcase of what she claimed were personal items. Inside were photographs, letters, and coded notes, the last remnants of her secret empire. Rumors spread quickly through the devastated city. Allied intelligence agents, British and American, began searching for the missing tapes of Salon Kitty. They believed they might contain invaluable evidence of Nazi hierarchy corruption, secret negotiations, or even proof of internal conspiracies. But the archives were gone, either destroyed by the SS or hidden so well that no one ever found them. A few fragments reportedly resurfaced in the 1950s, broken recordings of drunken voices, laughter, and faint confessions. Most were dismissed as forgeries, though whispers persisted that the CIA and MI6 each possessed copies of certain sensitive encounters. The truth, like everything born of Salon Kitty, was buried beneath layers of manipulation. For the women, survival meant erasure. They changed names, dyed their hair, fled to different zones of occupation. One former spy became a nurse in East Berlin. Another worked in a cafe near Potsdamer Platz, serving soldiers who would never guess her past. They lived with the weight of knowing that their actions had shaped the destinies of men far greater than themselves and doomed others. Some were racked with guilt, others numb with resignation. They had been used as instruments, not patriots. Their service had never been honored, only hidden. In post-war Germany, there was no place for women whose weapons had been intimacy and deceit. Kitty Schmidt faced her own reckoning. Brought in for questioning by British intelligence, she told investigators fragments of the truth, enough to paint herself as a reluctant accomplice, but never enough to expose the full scale of the operation. She insisted she had been forced into collaboration under threat of death, a claim both plausible and convenient. No formal charges were ever filed, but her reputation was destroyed. She lived her final years quietly, running a small boarding house, occasionally glancing out her window as if expecting ghosts to return. When she died, no one claimed her body for 2 days. The secrets she carried went with her into the grave. As Germany was divided and rebuilt, Salon Kitty faded into rumour, a forbidden story whispered by soldiers and journalists. dismissed by historians as wartime legend. Yet traces of its existence persisted in declassified intelligence files, in scattered testimonies, and in the uneasy silence of those who had lived through it. The idea that Hitler's regime had used seduction as a form of statecraft fascinated the post-war world. It revealed something more terrifying than propaganda, that in totalitarian systems, even desire could be weaponized. The notion of female spies of pleasure blurred the boundaries between victim and perpetrator, duty and damnation. By the late 1940s, the building that once housed Salon Kitty was rebuilt, its facade repaired, its history erased. Tourists and new residents passed by without knowing what had transpired behind those elegant walls. Only a handful of survivors knew the truth, and even they could no longer separate memory from myth. One woman, years later, told an interviewer, "We weren't heroes, and we weren't monsters. We were survivors, and that was our greatest crime." Her words captured the haunting ambiguity of their legacy, neither celebrated nor condemned, forever caught in the twilight between loyalty and survival. As the Cold War began, espionage changed shape, new nations, new enemies, new forms of control. But the lessons of Salon Kitty endured. Intelligence agencies around the world quietly studied its methods, refining them for a new era of psychological warfare. What began in a Berlin brothel became a blueprint for manipulation, the seductive art of extracting truth from weakness. The walls that once whispered the secrets of the Reich had fallen, but the echo of their deceit lived on, reverberating through the corridors of every intelligence service that followed. And in those echoes lay the final collapse, not of a building but of innocence itself. The women of Salon Kitty had seen too much, known too deeply, and loved too falsely. They were the last witnesses to a world where sin was patriotism and betrayal, a profession. In the ruins of Berlin, as dust settled over the graves of empires, their ghosts lingered, listening still, forever trapped in the silence they once weaponized. Years after the war ended, Berlin began to rebuild, its streets lined with the ghosts of memory, its people too exhausted to look backward. The world wanted to forget the horrors of the Reich, to bury the shame of collaboration, and to silence the whispers that came from behind closed doors. Yet, beneath the city's modern facade, stories like Salon Kitty refused to die. They lingered in the margins of history, too scandalous for textbooks, too human to erase. Historians spoke of tanks, treaties, and battles, but never of the women who turned lust into intelligence, who served a regime that never intended to remember them. In the decades that followed, fragments of the truth surfaced. Declassified British intelligence reports confirmed that Salon Kitty had indeed existed, an elaborate espionage operation that blurred the line between pleasure and politics. But even those records were incomplete, redacted, filled with gaps where the most damning evidence should have been. Some claimed the missing documents were destroyed to protect post-war alliances. Others believed they were hidden by Western agencies who had quietly continued the same tactics under new names. The truth, as always, lay somewhere between exposure and silence. For the women, history offered no justice. They were neither celebrated as spies nor mourned as victims. Their existence embarrassed both sides of the war's aftermath, the victors who wanted to claim moral purity and the defeated who wanted to forget their own corruption. Those who survived rarely spoke. When they did, their voices carried both defiance and despair. "We were told we served Germany," one said in an interview decades later, but Germany never served us. Their faces aged, their stories faded, and soon they became legends, reduced to footnotes in the archives of men who once whispered their names in the dark. Kitty Schmidt's old house was finally demolished in the 1950s, replaced by a modern apartment block. No plaque, no marker, no acknowledgement of what had happened there. But some locals claimed that when construction crews dug into the foundation, they found strange remnants, broken wires, hidden compartments, shards of glass etched with faint markings. One worker swore he found a microphone still embedded in a wall, its wire leading to nowhere. Whether truth or myth, the story became symbolic, the ghost of a surveillance system that refused to die, still listening to the city that once lived in secrets. In later years, filmmakers and writers would resurrect the story of Salon Kitty, sensationalizing it with scandal and seduction. Yet behind the erotic myth lay a deeper, darker truth. that in the machinery of totalitarianism, even intimacy becomes political. The women of Salon Kitty were not merely temptresses or pawns, they were mirrors reflecting the corruption of an empire that consumed everything: trust, love, and humanity itself. Their tragedy wasn't just that they were used, but that history found it easier to romanticize them than to understand them. The secret network that once controlled Berlin's beds became a metaphor for the entire Reich, built on illusion, fueled by fear, and destined to collapse under its own deceit. In the end, neither the SS nor their enemies ever truly controlled the women of Salon Kitty. The regime may have claimed their bodies, but the secrets they carried, the things they heard and never spoke, died with them. Some truths are too dangerous to record, too shameful to remember, and too human to forget. Even now, deep in the archives of intelligence services, there are sealed boxes labelled only with numbers, their contents classified indefinitely. Perhaps they contain the last whispers of those rooms, the voices of generals, the laughter of spies, the trembling confessions of dying men. Or perhaps they hold nothing at all, just silence. But silence, too, tells a story. It tells of a world where betrayal was survival, where seduction was warfare, and where even the victors feared what the truth might reveal. And so the legacy of Hitler's female spies remains, not carved in monuments, but echoing in the shadows of history. They were the invisible soldiers of desire, the watchers who were watched, the deceivers who were deceived. Their war ended long ago, but their story endures, a haunting reminder that in every empire built on control, there are rooms where the walls still listen and remember.